Winter settled over London like a silent decree, sharpening every breath and burdening every heart. Lady Eloan Hartley felt that weight most keenly as she stepped from her modest hired carriage and approached the glowing entrance of Hartley Court. She carried herself with the poise of someone who still remembered grace, though the world had long decided she no longer deserved it. Her gown, an ivory relic from brighter years, whispered faintly with each step as though mourning its own faded glory. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers blazed with unforgiving brilliance, casting merciless light upon every flaw society hungered to see. Eloan felt the weight of countless eyes sweeping over her with the cold precision of judgment sharpened by boredom and malice. Whispers rose behind jeweled fans, soft as silk yet cutting as blades. A pair of ladies drifted past, perfume heavy enough to mask the cruelty of their words. "Poor creature," one murmured, "still hoping to be seen, though no one remembers her name." Eloan pretended she had not heard, but the words lodged within her like thorns pressing through silk. She steadied her breath, fighting the ache blooming behind her composed expression. Dignity, she reminded herself, must endure. Always. Yet even her practiced composure faltered when a sudden ripple moved through the crowd, a collective breath drawn in reverent silence. The Duke of Ravenshade had arrived. Alastair Ravenshade, tall and severe beneath the sweep of his dark coat, carried the air of a man both respected and feared. His presence quieted the orchestra for a heartbeat, as though even the music paused in deference. Eloan tried to slip deeper into the shadows, praying he would not notice the woman London had chosen to cast aside. But his gaze swept the room with disarming precision. And it found her there. The moment their eyes met, Eloan felt her breath pause, not from admiration but from the cold fear of being seen too clearly. He studied her with unnerving calm, as though weighing truths no one else cared to uncover. Before she could look away, a gust of winter air brushed the balcony drapes, carrying voices she was never meant to hear. Two men lingered in the alcove just beyond the doors, speaking in low, urgent tones. Eloan froze as she recognized one voice, Lord Hawthorne, a man whose ambitions always slithered beneath polite conversation. Their words chilled her to the bone. "Tonight, after the final waltz," Hawthorne hissed, "the Duchess commands that all be set in motion. Then the Duke will fall, and she will claim what she desires." Eloan's blood ran cold, her pulse beating a frantic rhythm against the confines of her corset. She had no love for the Duke, yet no decent heart could remain silent when treachery walked so boldly. Breath trembling, she stepped back into the ballroom, swallowed by warmth that suddenly felt as hostile as the winter air. She searched for the Duke, driven by a duty she had never imagined would become hers. Tonight. He stood near the orchestra, posture straight, expression inscrutable beneath the glow of shifting candlelight. Eloan approached with steps that felt too loud, each one echoing the fear twisting through her ribs. When she reached him, she curtsied, her knees threatening to give way beneath the enormity of what she carried. "Your Grace," she whispered, voice thin as parchment. His attention fixed upon her instantly, sharp as a drawn blade. "Forgive my boldness," she murmured, "but your wife is deceiving you, and those aligned with her intend to strike tonight." "I could not remain silent. Not this dark night, sir." The Duke's expression did not shift, yet the faintest tightening at the corner of his jaw betrayed a storm contained by will alone. "You must tell me precisely what you heard," he said, his voice calm but edged with quiet steel. Eloan recounted the whispered plot, her words trembling but unembellished, for she refused to shape fear into theatrics. The Duke listened without interruption, his gaze steady enough to anchor her wavering breath. When she finished, silence settled between them, heavy as the snow-laden clouds pressing against the high windows. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "For your sake tonight. Whatever unfolds," he murmured, "your warning will not be forgotten." For a moment, Eloan felt the room steady, as though his belief lent her a strength she feared she had lost forever. But the music swelled, and reality returned with the harsh clarity of glass catching the light. All around them, society turned its gaze, sensing a shift without knowing its source. Eloan saw whispers form like frost along the edges of curiosity and malice. She felt the walls closing in, every chandelier glare a reminder that truth could be as dangerous as lies in this merciless world of names. Then, without hesitation, the Duke extended his arm, offering her a place at his side amid the circle of watching eyes. Gasps flickered through the ballroom like sparks jumping from a fire. No gesture could have shocked the gathered aristocracy more, for the disgraced Lady Aloan was the last woman anyone expected the Duke to acknowledge. Her pulse hammered as she rested her hand upon his arm, the contact warm enough to unravel the cold that had gripped her since she arrived. But beneath the warmth lay a truth she could not ignore. The night was shifting toward danger now. As they stepped forward, conversations fractured, and even the violins faltered beneath the weight of speculation. Aloan felt as though she were walking into a storm whose shape she could not yet discern. The Duke's grip was steady, but she sensed turbulence beneath his composed exterior, as if her warning had struck a hidden wound. He guided her through the gilded crowd, shielding her from the sharpest glances without uttering another word. Yet Aloan sensed the night tightening around them, as if every whisper, every glance, every flicker of candlelight foreshadowed a revelation poised to break before their very eyes. A frost-laden dawn crept across London, settling upon rooftops and gardens alike with a deceptive serenity, as though the city itself wished to forget the whispers and tremors of the previous night. Lady Aloan Hartley awoke with the lingering warmth of the Duke's arm at her side, or perhaps it was memory, a spectral comfort that made her pulse quicken even amidst the chill. The scandal of her brief visibility in the ballroom had already begun its quiet ripple through society, and she knew that every whispered conversation carried both curiosity and judgment. Yet, there was no retreat, only the slow, measured steps toward an unknown confrontation. By mid-morning, the Hartley carriage rattled along frost-crusted cobblestones, taking her through the city's narrow streets toward Ravenshade Manor. Inside, the warmth of the Duke's library was a refuge she did not expect to find. Candles flickered against tall oak panels, throwing elongated shadows that danced upon the rich tapestries depicting battles long past. Here, far from the prying eyes of London's elite, Alastair Ravenshade stood, his back to the fire, observing her with a scrutiny that made her palms clammy beneath her gloves. He was a man of contained power, yet tonight, beneath the veneer of composure, there was a spark that suggested vulnerability, an admission of trust she had never anticipated receiving. "Lady Hartley," he began, his voice low, carrying a weight she felt in her chest rather than her ears. "You have ventured far beyond propriety to deliver your warning. Were it not for the danger at hand, I should chastise your boldness." His words were formal, measured, but beneath the carefully chosen phrases, she discerned gratitude, and something that approached something more delicate, though not yet named. Aloan bowed her head, committing herself to restraint. "Your Grace, the truth is a burden I cannot carry alone." He stepped closer, pacing with deliberate care, as though each movement measured the consequences of the night's revelations. "Tell me what you know precisely," he commanded, his eyes dark pools of inquiry. She recounted the details, careful to avoid embellishment, presenting each fact with the trembling precision of someone who knew the cost of misstatement. And though her voice wavered, her composure did not falter entirely, for she had learned that dignity, once nearly stripped away, must be protected as fiercely as life itself. When her narrative concluded, silence enveloped the room like a velvet curtain, and the Duke's fingers drummed lightly upon the arm of his chair. "You speak with honesty," he said finally. "It is a rare quality, one that in this house, and perhaps in London itself, is often punished rather than cherished." Aloan met his gaze, sensing the depth of his reflection, the weight of a man considering the world through both duty and instinct. A delicate pause followed, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire, until Alastair moved with decisive motion to the mantelpiece. He retrieved a small object, presenting it to her with a careful, almost reverent hand. It was a silver locket, polished and intricate, adorned with a single dried violet pressed beneath its glass. Aloan's fingers hovered, reluctant to touch it, aware that such a token was neither casual nor benign. "This is yours," the Duke said. "A recognition of your courage, of your integrity. Perhaps a warning, too, that alliances are often quieter than they appear." Her breath caught, the intimacy of the gesture stirring a blush she had thought lost to years of public scorn. In Victorian society, tokens spoke louder than declarations. Each glint of silver, each preserved bloom, carried meaning that could either endear or condemn. The locket's weight was both literal and metaphorical as she fastened it about her neck. She felt the heat of his attention, discreet but palpable, and with it, a sense of belonging she had not dared to hope for. Yet society's scrutiny, she knew, would not permit such simplicity. The carriage that bore her home was observed from multiple windows along the route, and the very act of Alastair's escort sent ripples through whispers and gossip. Why would the Duke attend to her? Noble women mused behind lace fans. Why grant a scandalous lady any favor? Each query was a reminder that the world prized reputation above truth, and that even a gesture of trust could ignite flames of suspicion. By the time she returned to her own quarters, letters lay upon her desk with familiar sealings, each carrying society's varied response to her brief visibility. Invitations withdrew, others lingered hesitantly, and a few, bolder than most, suggested gossip, speculation, or curiosity. The contrast between her fear of exposure and the Duke's deliberate favor was both thrilling and dangerous, leaving her heart in a precarious balance. She wondered, with uneasy anticipation, whether Alastair's intervention would protect her or expose her further. That evening, as shadows lengthened and the city prepared for twilight, her thoughts returned relentlessly to Ravenshade Manor. She sensed a silent vigilance that extended beyond herself, a subtle tension woven into the walls and halls of the estate. Somewhere within that expansive, fire-lit sanctuary, she realized, the machinery of deceit and ambition began to stir. And though she had warned the Duke, had offered her knowledge to preserve him, she was no longer certain whether caution would suffice. In the late hours, the first stirrings of danger appeared. Footsteps echoed along the garden paths, muffled yet deliberate, and a figure paused just beyond the wrought iron gates. A shadow detached itself from the night, carrying intent she could not yet name. Eloan's pulse accelerated, a fusion of fear and resolve tightening her chest. She fingered the silver locket beneath her gown, drawing strength from its quiet significance. The Duke's trust, once extended, had become both shield and tether, binding her to events that would unravel far beyond her control. And then, just as the winter wind stilled against her windowpane, a carriage wheel clattered sharply on the street below Ravenshade Manor. Eloan pressed herself against the glass, breath fogging the cold pane, and realized with a shiver that the warning she had delivered was no longer a matter of rumor or threat. It was imminently alive. The night awaited, heavy with purpose, and she could sense that every heartbeat now brought them closer to the moment when loyalty, courage, and whispered truths would collide in ways she could not yet foresee. Her eyes lingered on the distant silhouette of the estate, where lanterns trembled in the dark. Somewhere within, Alastair Ravenshade prepared for what the evening would demand, and Eloan, clutching the silver locket against her heart, understood that the calm before the storm was over. Every step she had taken, every breath she had summoned in courage, led to a singular, undeniable fact. The night's events would decide not only the Duke's fate, but her own, and perhaps the fragile spark between them as well. The winter wind whispered past the window, carrying the promise of revelation, and Eloan Hartley, alone yet not entirely unprotected, waited with a mixture of dread and resolve. And somewhere deep within her, a soft ember of understanding glimmered. The scandal that society had feared might yet illuminate a path to honor, truth, and perhaps something dangerously close to hope. The doors of Ravenshade Manor loomed in shadow, and with them, rain fell in steady, relentless sheets against the tall windows of Ravenshade Manor, a steady percussion that echoed the tension simmering within. Lady Eloan Hartley stood at the threshold of the library, her gloves damp, her gown clinging slightly from the chill outside. The fire cast elongated shadows across the polished oak floor, flickering upon the spines of leather-bound tomes that had witnessed centuries of whispered confidences and hidden ambitions. She had never imagined she would stand here under such circumstances, summoned to the heart of the Duke's home, a private witness to secrets she barely dared articulate even to herself. And yet, when the heavy door closed behind her, she realized there was no turning back. Alastair Ravenshade waited near the hearth, the glow of the flames catching in the dark sweep of his coat, rendering him at once formidable and human. His hands rested lightly upon the mantel, knuckles pale beneath the lamplight, a subtle tremor that belied the calm he projected. He did not immediately speak. Instead, he studied her with that penetrating gaze which seemed capable of weighing thought and intent, as though he could see every fear and truth she sought to conceal. Eloan felt her chest tighten, an instinctive awareness that honesty here carried consequences far beyond society's whispering corridors. "My lady," he said at last, voice low yet deliberate, "the night has been long, and yet I see the burden has not left your shoulders. Speak plainly, for I will not suffer misdirection, nor will I indulge in illusions." Each word was carefully measured, formal yet intimate, and it forced her to confront the fear and courage entwined within her heart. She drew a trembling breath, the scent of the fire mingling with the faint perfume of winter roses that clung to her gown. "Your Grace," she began, "I have delivered the warning I overheard, and nothing more. I cannot embellish, and I dare not deceive. Yet the danger is real, and it is near." He stepped closer, the weight of his presence pressing gently upon the room, anchoring her resolve even as it unsettled her. "Tell me what you have observed beyond what was spoken," he prompted, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Eloan's hands flexed against the folds of her skirt, a subtle gesture of restraint. "It is not merely a plan to threaten you, sir," she said, her voice gaining steadiness, "but a pattern of betrayal orchestrated by one you trust most. Your wife. She conspires against you, and I fear her intent is calculated and patient." The words hung between them, a fragile thread of truth in a room otherwise still with anticipation. For a moment, silence claimed the space, filled only by the crackle of the hearth and the rain's steady rhythm. Then Alistair moved with a sudden, deliberate grace, seating himself at the large desk, hands clasped before him. "I have long suspected the hollowness of my union with Helena," he admitted, voice low and almost vulnerable. "Yet suspicion alone does not prepare one for confirmation. You, Lady Hartley, have brought not merely words, but evidence of a reality I would have hoped to ignore." The admission struck her with unexpected force. She had anticipated gratitude, perhaps relief, but never such stark, unguarded confession from a man so measured, so disciplined. Eloan lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of the heat in her cheeks. The fire's glow painted the Duke in shades both terrifying and intimate, illuminating the contours of a man who had lived decades in restraint. "I am honored that my words bear weight," she murmured, "though I fear the night's events will demand more courage than I can claim." Alistair's eyes softened for the briefest instant, revealing a flicker of humanity beneath the veneer of authority. He gestured toward a high-backed chair, inviting her to sit, though she hesitated, aware that proximity carried significance that society would scarcely tolerate. Finally, she lowered herself onto the chair, posture rigid despite her trembling hands. The room seemed to contract around them, the flames reaching upward as though to witness their exchange. "You must understand, my lord," she said carefully, "I have lived long under scrutiny and misjudgment. Society's judgment has followed me like a shadow, and every act of perceived error has been magnified, whispered behind fans and veils. I bring you truth unadorned because I have no choice, yet fear the consequences." Her voice softened, threading vulnerability through restraint. Alistair regarded her silently, his expression a complex tapestry of thought. Then, moving with a caution that belied his usual decisiveness, he extended his gloved fingers toward hers. The brief, inadvertent touch was electric in its simplicity, a spark that illuminated the tension between propriety and unspoken desire. Eloan drew her hand back slightly, though not entirely, aware that such contact, even in its restraint, carried weight in a society that demanded observation and concealment. "Your courage is unusual," he said quietly, voice tempered with admiration and unacknowledged longing. "It wounds me tenderly, in a way affection cannot, and yet it compels me to act." Her pulse quickened. The intimacy of proximity, the unspoken understanding, pressed against her very ribs. "I merely wish to preserve honor where it is endangered," she replied, carefully framing her intent within the confines of propriety. Yet the warmth from the brief touch lingered, and her resolve, though strong, trembled at the presence of a man who had become the embodiment of both judgment and protection. The boundaries of their roles felt porous, yet neither dared cross the threshold aloud. The quiet was broken abruptly by the sound of approaching footsteps, deliberate and assured, echoing along the corridor outside. Both turned instinctively, tension coiling tight as shadows stretched long across the room. The moment, delicate and charged, fractured beneath the certainty of intrusion. Eloan's breath caught as the realization struck. The threat she had warned of was no mere rumor or distant plotting. It was immediate, palpable, and closing upon them with intent unmistakable and relentless. Alistair's eyes met hers, a storm of calculation, concern, and unspoken words flashing within their depths. "Stay close," he murmured, voice a low command that blended protection with authority. The firelight danced upon his features, highlighting a vulnerability seldom revealed, and Eloan, despite fear threading through her, felt the strange and undeniable weight of trust placed upon her. Together, in that intimate, firelit space, they became a silent counterpoint to the treachery gathering beyond the walls. As the footsteps drew nearer, the rain's patter against the windows seemed to intensify, thrumming like a herald of confrontation. The room, once a sanctuary of whispered truths, now braced for consequences yet unseen. Eloan clutched the folds of her gown, the silver locket resting at her throat a quiet reminder of courage and responsibility intertwined. Every breath was measured, every heartbeat amplified in the hush between flame and shadow. The library doors, heavy and imposing, now seemed as if they might guard or betray them alike. Outside, the stormed night whispered threats, yet inside, a fragile alliance had taken shape. Two lives tethered by necessity, by courage, and by truths neither could afford to ignore. And in that moment, as the first shadow touched the threshold, Eloan Hartley realized the private confession she had delivered was not merely words. The storm that had pressed upon London since dawn now raged with unrelenting fury, lashing against the tall windows of Ravenshade Manor as though the heavens themselves sought to cleanse the world of deceit. Within the firelit halls, Lady Eloan Hartley moved with cautious purpose, her fingers brushing the polished banisters as she followed the Duke toward the grand drawing-room. Candles flickered against the ornate walls, sending shadows dancing across the gilded mirrors, each reflection a silent witness to the tension swelling between them. The manor, normally a bastion of quiet order, seemed to hold its breath, anticipating confrontation as if the walls themselves understood the peril approaching. Alastair Ravenshade's expression was resolute, the measured calm of his demeanor masking the storm of indignation and resolve beneath. He paused at the center of the drawing-room, where the sprawling hearth illuminated the polished floorboards and the delicate china upon the mantel. His eyes met Eloan's, conveying without words both apology and protection, a silent acknowledgment of the burden she had borne and the dangers she now faced beside him. She returned his gaze, feeling the electric tension that had slowly built between them, the unspoken recognition that their alliance was no longer casual, no longer safe, but irrevocably bound. The sudden crash of the door heralded the arrival of the Duchess. Helena Ravenshade entered with a flourish of silk and fury, her gown a cascade of crimson and gold that seemed to mock the subdued palette of the library and drawing-rooms. Her eyes blazed with indignation, sharp as daggers, and her voice cut through the crackling fire. "So this is the woman who dares to insinuate herself into my house, into my life, into my husband's confidence." Each syllable was measured for effect, yet underneath burned a venomous fear that her secrets were laid bare. Eloan stood her ground, back straight, hands folded delicately before her, a figure of quiet strength against the storm of accusation. Alastair stepped forward, the authority in his voice cutting through the tension like tempered steel. "You will not malign her," he said, each word deliberate, unwavering. "Nor will you undermine what you have sought to destroy. The deception you have woven is no longer hidden, and tonight it ends." Helena's face paled for the briefest moment, just enough to betray the vulnerability she had concealed beneath layers of arrogance. Her co-conspirators, who had lingered in the shadows, now emerged, unsure, faltering, as Alastair's words confirmed that their plots were exposed. Eloan felt the pulse of adrenaline surge through her, the culmination of weeks of whispered warnings and cautious steps arriving at this singular instant. She had feared exposure, feared blame, feared the collapse of the fragile trust the Duke had placed in her. Yet here, in the glare of confrontation, she realized that her courage, measured, deliberate, and honest, had carved a space for truth to prevail. Alastair's unwavering stance against betrayal had shielded her, both literally and metaphorically, and she sensed a shift in their connection, a subtle acknowledgement of shared purpose and mutual respect that transcended societal expectation. Helena's fury erupted anew, sharper and more desperate. "You will not lecture me, nor presume to command me in my own house," she cried, her voice fracturing as she realized the futility of her threats. Alastair's gaze did not waver. "I am the master of this house, and I am its guardian." "Your schemes end tonight," he replied, voice low but imbued with the weight of undeniable authority. The co-conspirators, now fully aware of their exposure, exchanged anxious glances, uncertainty replacing the confidence with which they had approached this confrontation. The firelight flickered across the room, illuminating the tension and the sharp edges of emotion etched upon each face. Eloan felt the warmth of the hearth mix with the heat rising in her chest, a potent combination of fear, triumph, and the unexpected intimacy forged through shared ordeal. The Duke, steadfast and commanding, had chosen to protect her openly, a gesture more profound than any whispered commendation. In that act, she understood the depth of his integrity, the rare courage to stand against both personal betrayal and societal expectation in a single, unflinching motion. Helena's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You will regret this. The world does not forgive such audacity." Alistair's response was deliberate, cold, and final. "I shall not regret protecting what is just, nor shall I permit lies and treachery to prevail under my roof. Leave or be removed. The choice is yours." His command carried the full weight of authority tempered by righteousness, leaving no room for hesitation. The co-conspirators retreated, unable to oppose a will so resolute, leaving Helena standing alone, diminished by exposure and impotent fury. In the stillness that followed, Iloan dared to breathe, the tension coiling in her chest loosening slightly. The Duke turned to her, and she met his gaze, noting the subtle shift, the quiet acknowledgement of gratitude and recognition, the understanding that they had traversed danger together and emerged unscathed. Words were unnecessary. The touch of his hand upon hers conveyed more than any declaration could, a silent promise that the bond formed in adversity was neither fleeting nor fragile. She felt an unfamiliar surge of warmth, a fragile hope that extended beyond mere survival, touching the possibility of trust, perhaps even affection. The storm outside abated, leaving a soft patter against the windows, mirroring the quiet stillness that now settled within the drawing-room. Iloan's eyes traced the outlines of the Duke, noting the lines of concern, determination, and subtle tenderness that softened his otherwise formidable presence. She realized that her role had transformed, from passive observer of society's cruelty to active participant in shaping truth, in protecting integrity, in influencing the course of the Duke's life, and by extension, her own. Alistair's voice, when it came, was low, carrying a resonance that spoke of private acknowledgement beyond the formalities of society. "Tonight has revealed much," he said, "and yet there is more to uncover. We have acted rightly, but vigilance remains. The path ahead is not yet free of shadows." Iloan nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words, understanding that triumph did not erase all threats, nor did protection absolve future dangers. Yet for the first time, she felt a measure of agency, a sense that courage and truth could shape outcomes even within the strictures of expectation and convention. As the final candles flickered and the last whispers of tension eased, Iloan stepped slightly closer to the Duke, drawn by the gravity of shared experience. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I am grateful for your trust, and I fear the night is not yet complete." Alistair's eyes darkened with recognition, a subtle acknowledgement of both warning and anticipation. Outside, the wind rustled against the manor's gates, a reminder that the world beyond remained unpredictable, that shadows lingered even in the wake of triumph. The quiet intimacy of the moment hung between them, electric and unspoken, a delicate balance of propriety and unacknowledged longing. And then, the distant echo of a carriage wheel striking the cobblestones reached the windows, muffled but unmistakable, a harbinger of news, or perhaps another shadowed attempt at intrusion. Iloan drew a steadying breath, fingers tightening lightly upon the folds of her gown, aware that the resolution achieved in the drawing-room was temporary, fragile, and precariously balanced upon the courage and integrity that had carried them thus far. Her eyes met the Duke's once more, and in the depths of his gaze she glimpsed the same understanding she carried within her own chest, that the night had not concluded, that the balance between truth and treachery remained unsettled, and that their alliance, once forced by circumstance, had now become the tether upon which both their fates might hinge. The hearth's glow flickered, casting elongated shadows, and Iloan realized with a quiet, exhilarating dread that the night's climax had delivered both victory and the promise of trials yet to come. The night had descended upon London like a velvet shroud, heavy with rain and the distant toll of church bells marking the hour. Ravenshade Manor, its windows aglow with firelight, seemed to breathe with tension, each shadow cast by flickering candlelight a silent witness to events long anticipated. Lady Iloan Hartley stood at the threshold of the grand hall, her gown damp from the storm yet her posture unwavering. In her hand, the silver locket rested against her chest, a tangible reminder of courage, trust, and the perilous path that had led her here. Outside, the wind carried the muffled clatter of carriage wheels along the cobblestone streets, a herald of visitors and threats yet unseen. Alistair Ravenshade emerged from the library, his coat damp, hair pressed against his forehead from the rain, and eyes dark with unspoken vigilance. He approached Eloan, each step deliberate, a silent promise of protection and resolve. "They will not breach these walls unnoticed," he said quietly, voice edged with authority and restrained urgency. "Whatever danger approaches, we face it together." She met his gaze, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation, aware that the night's culmination demanded both courage and clarity. For weeks, they had navigated society's whispers, deception, and peril, yet nothing could have prepared them for the immediacy of the threat now pressing at their door. The first knock came, a single, deliberate rap that echoed through the hall like a drumbeat of fate. Helena Ravenshade's co-conspirators, emboldened by arrogance, had arrived despite exposure, their intentions cloaked in the shadows of the storm. Alastair gestured for Eloan to remain close, the warmth of his presence a tether amidst the tension. As the door creaked open, a figure stepped into the hall, drenched and defiant, eyes flashing with calculated malice. The room seemed to contract, air thick with anticipation and the metallic scent of rain-laden stone. Every detail, the glint of sword hilts, the subtle flutter of silk cloaks, the nervous shift of feet upon polished floorboards, was a signal of imminent confrontation. "You should have stayed away." Alastair's voice was calm yet carried steel. "Your schemes are exposed, and yet you come to challenge me directly?" The intruder smiled faintly, lips tight, revealing nothing, yet every gesture suggested confidence in chaos and cunning in manipulation. Eloan, her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm, felt a tremor of fear but drew strength from the unspoken bond that had grown through shared peril. She knew that truth and courage, once offered, could act as shields as powerful as any weapon. The confrontation began with a measured exchange of words, each syllable carefully chosen to wound, intimidate, or negotiate. Helena's representative advanced, eyes narrowing as if to pierce the resolve of those who dared oppose treachery. Alastair's posture remained unyielding, gaze unwavering, each sentence a precise strike against deceit. "Your intentions are known," he declared. "There is no path through honor for you tonight." The words resonated through the hall, cutting through the storm's roar and the tension thickening the air. The intruders faltered, uncertainty flickering across their faces, the illusion of control slipping through their grasp. Eloan, sensing the pivotal moment, stepped forward, voice steady despite her racing heart. "You rely on fear and secrecy," she said, each word deliberate, "but truth and courage are far stronger than you imagine." Her presence, small yet luminous, shifted the balance of the room. The intruders, confronted by honesty that dared to defy malice, hesitated, and in that pause, Alastair seized advantage. A swift gesture, measured and precise, signaled the guards concealed along the walls, and the would-be conspirators were surrounded, their menace extinguished before it could fully ignite. Helena herself, remaining distant but observing, saw her plans collapse with a shock she could scarcely conceal. Rage flickered across her face, a sudden realization of impotence against a man who combined vigilance with moral certainty. Alastair approached her, voice controlled yet commanding. "Your deceptions end tonight, not through vengeance, but through the revelation of truth. The choice is no longer yours. Depart, or face consequences you cannot escape." The Duchess's fury, constrained by social expectation and exposure, forced her to retreat, the night's triumph both absolute and public. With the danger removed, the hall seemed to exhale, the storm outside fading into a gentle patter, and the candlelight reflected upon faces no longer tense but illuminated with relief and quiet exhilaration. Alastair turned toward Eloan, expression softened, eyes dark with intensity yet edged with something gentler, gratitude, acknowledgement, and perhaps the stirrings of unspoken affection. She met his gaze fully, noting the subtle shift in posture, the measured relaxation of tension that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. The peril of the evening had created intimacy, trust, and the delicate promise of something beyond mere survival. "You were remarkable," Alastair said quietly, stepping closer. "Without your courage, your foresight, none of this would have been possible." Eloan felt her cheeks warm, the significance of his words weaving through her chest, mingling with relief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. "I only spoke truth," she replied, voice trembling with quiet pride. "And I only acted because the danger left no alternative." The locket at her throat seemed to pulse softly, a symbol of bravery and connection forged in adversity. In that moment, Each understood that loyalty, integrity, and shared purpose had eclipsed fear, leaving them tethered not only by circumstance but by mutual respect. Outside, the storm had diminished, leaving the streets slick with rain and reflecting the flickering gaslights of London. Inside, the hall seemed transformed, no longer a battleground of tension and suspicion, but a sanctuary where truth had prevailed and courage had been acknowledged. Eloan felt a shift within herself, an unspoken realization that the path of honor, though perilous, could lead to both security and unexpected companionship. Alastair's presence, solid and unwavering, offered reassurance that danger, once confronted, could yield not only survival but opportunity. The evening drew toward its quiet conclusion, yet both understood that vigilance remained necessary. The world beyond Ravenshade Manor still harbored whispers, secrets, and ambitions capable of igniting future conflicts. Yet in this moment, in the glow of candlelight and the fading echoes of confrontation, a fragile equilibrium had been achieved. Truth, courage, and decisive action had restored order, however temporarily, and had forged a bond that neither threat nor circumstance could easily sever. Eloan, standing near the hearth, felt her hand brush lightly against Alastair's. The touch was brief but laden with unspoken meaning, acknowledgement, gratitude, perhaps the first stirrings of deeper connection. He returned her glance with equal subtlety, a silent promise that the evening's trials had not only preserved life and honor, but had also revealed the potential for something extraordinary to grow between them. Words were unnecessary. In the shared silence, both understood the magnitude of what had transpired. The distant clatter of another carriage upon the rain-slicked streets reached the windows, a reminder that even triumph is transient and vigilance eternal. Yet within the warmth of the drawing-room, beneath the flickering glow of candles and the quiet murmur of settling tension, Lady Eloan Hartley and Duke Alastair Ravenshade experienced a rare and profound certainty, that through courage, honesty, and unwavering integrity, even the most treacherous night could yield clarity, justice, and connection. As the storm's remnants whispered against the manor, Eloan clasped the silver locket at her throat, feeling its weight as both a talisman and a testament. Alastair's presence beside her, steady and resolute, reinforced the understanding that shared trials had transformed uncertainty into strength, fear into courage, and whispers into declarations. The night's events had reached their climax, yet in the quiet aftermath, a soft, thrilling tension remained, an unspoken awareness that the world beyond Ravenshade Manor still held challenges, yet they now faced them together, unbroken, unafraid, and bound by a trust forged in fire and shadow. And as the last candle flickered, casting its final glow upon the polished floors, Eloan's gaze met Alastair's, and in that gaze was a promise, unspoken, undeniable, and electrifying, that the trials of the night had not merely concluded, but had set the stage for destinies intertwined, the first chapter of courage, revelation, and perhaps a love neither had dared to hope for, yet both now felt inevitable.